Please welcome the Rancho Mirage High School Reflections a cappella singers.
3, 4, 1. It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine Street's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that can go to space. With the air like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy, clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bow, here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got, no holding back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy, clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Bring me down, can nothing bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can nothing bring me down. I said, I'm happy, bring me down, can nothing bring me down. Your love is too high, bring me down, can nothing bring me down. I said, because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy, clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy, 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 happy.
Please welcome CEO of iNACL, Susan Patrick.
Thank you. Welcome, welcome, and thank you for coming together, traveling far and wide for the 2019 Symposium. I'm so excited and inspired by all of the work that I've seen across the field. We're seeing change happen across the US and across the globe. We have more than 18 countries represented here joining us. So we are grateful for all of you that have been traveling far and wide to be here. Where we are is a special place, and I want to acknowledge this beautiful desert landscape. I want to recognize and respect the people's land, the tribal lands of the indigenous Agua Caliente band of the Cahuilla Indians. We received a welcome from the tribal chairman, Jeff Gruby. We want to thank you and recognize and pay tribute to you, your community, and your ancestors as stewards of this spectacular place. This is an oasis with ancient springs, and we are grateful to gather in these natural wonders. Thank you. Gathering is an important way for us to learn together. I know that I'm learning every day from all of the work that you're doing, and we're all learners in this work together. We're all on our own journey. Our theme is shining a light on the future of learning. And there's no one way to do this. There's no one model in envisioning a future for our youth that will ensure that all children, and we mean all, will have the opportunities to learn, to thrive, to be successful, healthy, and prosperous in the future, to be able to contribute to their communities, and realize the hopes that we have for an open and just society. I'm so excited to be here and to welcome all of you. You are the ones doing the work, and I'm grateful for you. It's hard work, it's complex work, and we have to go about creating new models that bridge from yesterday to today to design holistically. I want to share a little bit our keynotes and the folks that we have over the next 3 days at our core. Tomorrow morning, we will open up with a global perspective on education innovation, on innovative, culturally responsive, world-class schools in New Zealand and many other countries, what it takes to create future makers. Tomorrow's lunch will have a regional and state focus on leaders and systems transformation. We have a student panel on Wednesday and our ending keynote on transformation and the adaptive changes that are embedded in communities and their hopes for our youth. Each year, we get 700 to 800 session proposals, and we see how the field is moving. We see the energy on where the trends are, and it's remarkable. We know that last year, with the closing keynote from Dr. Cantor, which was amazing, we bridged to the opening for this year to go deeper into what the science of learning tells us about youth development and how that might inform our thinking as we design new models. We see how colleges of education are beginning to modernize professional learning. Over the next few days, we're going to have hundreds of sessions going deep and shining a light on what is happening to inform the future of learning. And this work is happening by you. This work is happening by educators in your communities. Well, I'm super excited to be here, and I'm so grateful to all of you. I know this work is really complex and difficult, and no one system across the globe is perfect. You can talk to the leading countries, and they'll say, we're not nearly there yet. And you can go to the most innovative models anywhere across the US. And we know it's a long road. But we're together, and we're here to learn together, and I want to create an open space for all of us to share, be curious, ask lots of questions, and be honest. And for those of you that are just getting started, those of us that have been working in the field for 10, 15 years, we're here to help you. Feel free to ask questions. And if you see someone you haven't met before, reach out and connect, because this is about networking and relationships and connecting. So I'd like to start and introduce Dr. Sandra Lyon, who's the superintendent of Palm Springs Unified School District, who's going to help welcome us here. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, we have more energy. You're in Palm Springs. We got to have a good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here today to welcome you to our wonderful city and the Coachella Valley, and to an important symposium shining a light on the future of learning. As educators, researchers, and policymakers, whatever your role in the educational landscape, you understand how far we've come in education and how far we have to go. We now know so much more about what works to help students learn than we ever did before, and yet it is so hard to change our systems of education. We fall back on what we've always known, what we've always believed, what we've always done. It is time to get people out of their comfort zones and make meaningful change in how education is delivered and learning happens, so that each and every student has that amazing opportunity to thrive and grow. As you know, we can't continue to accept the status quo. we have to be the agents of change, and that's why you're all here, for our students and for their future. You're here because you believe every student can learn at a high level and has the right and the ability to access a fabulous education. I hope during these few days your battery is recharged, your imagination is ignited, you see old friends and make new connections, and ultimately that you're able to shine a light that shows you how you will go back to your role, whatever that is, to affect the changes that we need to see for our students. As John Dewey said so presciently more than 100 years ago, if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful conference and do get out and enjoy some of the wonderful weather we're having right now. Welcome to Palm Springs.
Thank you. And thank you for your leadership in Palm Springs. Thank you. So this is about educators designing the future of learning. Our mission at iNACOL is to drive education systems transformation. And some of you might know at 5 p.m. today, we have a very special announcement that we're excited about. But I'm going to talk about a global perspective and a national perspective on the state of the field. So what's interesting as you travel to other countries and talk to ministries of education, global education systems are asking very different fundamental questions. Is our education system fit for purpose for the increasingly complex world we live in today? Is it fit for purpose to create an open and just society that we aim for healthy and prosperous futures for our youth, for our communities? And to do this, they are using the research and the learning sciences on how kids learn best. They're fundamentally examining the purpose of education in today's rapidly changing context and engaging communities in different conversations about what their hopes are for youth. So we do have 18 different countries at this symposium, but it's amazing. Around the world, many countries have been working on personalized learning for 10, 20 years. OECD published this book on personalized learning in the mid-2000s. It's one of a number of resources that they've created on the nature of learning, using research to inform innovative models. And this publication in 2006 on personalized learning recognizes the need to move from an industrial one-size-fits-all model. There is growing awareness that one-size-fits-all approaches to school knowledge and organization are ill-adapted to individuals' needs and to the knowledge society at large. To move beyond uniform mass production, the factory model, can be described as personalization. And it recounts several different countries' journeys in making this move. In the United Kingdom, David Miliband, who is the minister, said, quote, "To pursue excellence and equity simultaneously and aggressively, we must personalize. To combine flexibility and delivery with accountability for results, we need more clear data on outcomes. For meeting the demand to develop competence of knowledge and skills." Since 2007, in New Zealand, they went through a full curriculum redesign with a broader definition of success. At the same time, they launched a large initiative for personalized learning. This, along with the alignment of all of their credentials from K through 12, through higher education, into career tech education, and even with the industry training organizations in the workforce for every licensure. It's all competency-based and outlines the knowledge and skills of what students need to know and be able to do. Imagine this, if in middle school and high school, you had a roadmap to set goals and aspirations that you could begin earning. Level 1 means basic literacy, basic numeracy. Level 2 means more advanced. And you earn like badges throughout your lifetime. You could go to university and be a lawyer or a doctor and still earn your graphic design credentials and micro-credentials. There are a few states starting to look at this now. Any given state in the US could begin to do this alignment. In Alabama, they're calling it a continuous learning system, and they're just starting to get going. So this is towards a very different view of the future. And when you look at innovative high school models, innovative school models from all over the world, there are these 6 common trends that you see in these schools. One, all focus on whole child personalized learning for each student's needs, interests, passions, and aspirations. They are goal-driven, helping students navigate and be motivated by earning the pathways forward. Teachers are designers and decision makers in these new models. A curriculum redesign is at the core, about relevance to the real world, interdisciplinary, starting to break apart subjects, collaborative, project, research-based, individual learning plans or personalized learning plans for every student. In New Zealand, they call this a student achievement record over a lifetime. We're starting to see this in Georgia, where they're developing a passport, a student learning passport that will build knowledge, skills, and competencies over time into the workforce. Redesign school environments, enabling teachers to work collectively to support students, and teaching as inquiry around using research to design and refine. The other key global trends, this is from UNESCO, at the top, is about learning how to learn and focusing on the development of core competencies. It is rethinking curriculum development and curriculum redesign for more inclusive education and culturally responsive education. The role of educators must be a priority, and we're seeing networks of learning spaces inside of school and outside of school. This is requiring the recognition and validation of prior learning or learning outside of school walls. So we're seeing these big changes start to transform the entire educational landscape around the globe. So as we stand back, ask what is the problem you're trying to solve. So often the most striking, innovative solutions come from realizing maybe that our original concept of the problem was wrong. This is not about tweaking the current education system. This is fundamentally about transforming our education systems towards a higher purpose. So it's important to get clear on the words that we're using to describe elements of these new models. What is competency-based education? What does personalized learning really mean? Because understanding these definitions impacts the quality of our implementations. And how does this differ from this traditional system that we're bridging to? So personalized learning and competency-based ed, they can mean many things to different people, but it's really important to think about what those mean, what it is, what policies will support it, and what practices are core to enabling it. But fundamentally, what we're talking about here is using the learning sciences and research to design and contribute to the future of our education. Okay, so in 2011, we brought together more than 100 educators and innovators working in competency-based education to help bring the field around a working definition in 5 parts. Well, competency-based education is about students advancing upon demonstrating mastery. It's about competencies having clear and explicit learning goals that empower students. They know what their goals are. It's about assessment being meaningful. They know if they haven't gotten there yet, they know what they need to do next. And about students immediately getting timely feedback. This means you don't have gaps as you go from week to week. It's immediate feedback until you are at proficient or advanced proficiency as you go along. And learning outcomes emphasize the broader range of knowledge and skills. Now, when we developed this working definition in partnership with the field, We knew that as our knowledge of the field got deeper and deeper, that we would need to update it. And we recognized there are two things missing, two really important concepts missing in this definition. One is student agency and a focus on equity. We believe that equity is a central goal of advancing competency-based education systems, and that communities that are inspiring to equity work, to achieve equity, must work towards a system that is built on every child achieving mastery and getting the supports. So this revised definition, the first part is on student agency and empowerment, and you will see strategies to ensure equity for all students are embedded in the culture, structure, and pedagogy of schools and education systems. This idea of a competency-based system is designed around learning. So what are the flaws of the traditional system? We know that every system is designed to get the outcomes that it achieves. And this is true of our traditional system. It was designed to rank and sort kids to different outcomes. There is high level of variability in our grading. When we have grades from A to F in particular subjects, we know from teacher to teacher, from school to school, there's high variability. Grading systems depend on extrinsic motivation. It's time-based. Once that time period is over, you go on to the next lesson to the next day. This leaves huge gaps across a student's learning pathway. And it's based on a narrow set of academic options. Well, literacy and numeracy are absolutely essential, but no longer sufficient. It's based on a fixed mindset. So a competency-based education system is a full system change. It's a structure that's based on a growth mindset. It's the culture that believes all students can learn. It's mastery-based. It builds educator capacity from that calibration, organized for proficiency, and it's organized to personalize learning. So in 2011, we worked with the field to build a common definition of personalized learning. And there are lots of good frameworks out there, like the LEAP Innovation Framework for Personalized Learning. It's very detailed, it's excellent. But this is a summary that personalized learning is about tailoring learning for students' strengths, needs, and challenges, enabling student voice and choice, what, how, when, and where they learn, to provide flexibility and supports to ensure mastery. So there's the connection with the competency-based system of the highest standards for all students. So it's holding all students to those high standards, but giving flexible approaches. There is a lot of confusion in the field that flexible pacing equals personalization, and that's not true. It may be one element of a personalized learning approach, but it does not equal personalization. So personalization and competency-based education systems go hand in hand. When you think about ensuring all students get to mastery, you can have personalized approaches that result in variable outcomes if it's not built on a system of mastery. And without personalizing, it's unlikely that just focusing on competency will reach the outcomes that we hope for. So what does this look like? Every student has a personalized learning plan, a map over time of the knowledge, skills, and dispositions. Data systems are supporting students and teachers, clearly indicating where they are, what their level of progress is. Data is far more transparent about what students know and can do and where they need help. There are rubrics that help teachers understand what mastery looks like with evidence. Students know their targets, they collaborate with each other, and educator roles start to shift. They're much more collaborative. And that learning is taking place in the classroom, place-based, in the community, in internships. More and more we're seeing in paid internships. so that students are getting relevant, meaningful experiences in jobs of interest and bringing back those skills into the classroom. It's about expanding learning opportunities. So competency-based education is fundamental to personalizing learning at scale, and it challenges almost all of our assumptions about the present system. David Hood from New Zealand wrote this book, and in it he describes the need to move from industrial systems of learning, and he calls it the paradigm of one. One teacher teaching one class, one subject of one age, using one curriculum at one pace for one classroom for 1 hour. Is this what our youth need in the world that they're entering, the world that we're living in today? And so where did we start and where are we going right now as a field? What's the state of the field? In the US, in 2009, there were about a handful of states that had started to move from students earning credit just on seat time. The number of minutes they sit in a seat is how you fill up a high school diploma to graduate. How much does that really tell you about what a student can know and do or what their assets are for their future? One of the core things that we need to begin thinking about as we think about profile of a graduate, broader definitions of success, is are we working with our students on meaningful credentials? And what would a meaningful credential look like? From 2012 to 2019, you have almost all states creating flexibility for competency-based systems. So this is really exciting. We're seeing state policy move. We're seeing more and more states opening up room for these innovations. They're doing it by states creating innovation zones that offer waivers for districts as they engage in the work and they run into old, outdated rules, outdated laws, and addressing them. We're seeing states put together task forces asking really important questions about what we need to do to move forward to modernize education, to create a future-focused system. We're seeing credit flexibility, pilot programs for personalized learning and competency-based ed. You'll hear a lot about this tomorrow at lunch with the systems transformation work that's happening in Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Virginia. It's really exciting to see what is starting to take hold across the states, and multiple pathways to graduation. So what are future directions in practice across the field? There are 10 really critical areas that we're focusing on right now for successful practice. And first and primarily, this is about innovation for equity. When we published this paper, Designing for Equity, written by Chris Sturgis and Catherine Casey, and it offers equity principles and equity strategies for designing new models. We've got to nurture a strong culture of learning and inclusivity. It is very important to engage our communities and continue to engage our communities in the new definitions of success and graduate outcomes. But what if you look over a personalized learning plan for every student, you're going to have far more transparency in how your system is serving our youth. You have better information, better data to monitor and respond to student progress, proficiency, and pace. It's about supporting students to build agency and ensuring consistency in our expectations and how we determine proficiency. So this focus on equity, you must have equity strategies in place as you're building new models. Student agency is the next big area of focus for practice, and it's about creating students with self-efficacy. It's important to have an explicit theory of change when you get started. How are you going to build that bridge from traditional models towards the future? And core to this, and we're seeing one of the things that we just saw so many developments in from last year's symposium is how many communities are engaging in these important questions around broader definitions of student success, more holistic definitions of student success for what a graduate needs to know and be able to do. It's happening at the local level, it's putting pressure on the state level, it's happening in many states, and this is really important. This is fundamental to beginning the work, setting that North Star. It's about ensuring that we have high-quality learning environments. So Chris Sturgis and Catherine Casey authored this book with 16 quality principles, offering a quality framework for competency-based systems. And what it does is it calls out, it knows that on this journey, we might be good at a few things that we're trying to implement, but there are areas that we're getting tripped up on. And it calls out what success looks like. It calls out look-fors, like what do you expect to see, red flags, and it offers guidance that we've learned from across the field together over the last 10 years. It's about building a strong culture, a culture of inclusivity, a culture that is responsive, a culture that is embedded in all children can learn. It's about growth mindset and really understanding what you need to give every student and every educator. Every adult, every student in the system is on a pathway and their own journey. It's about promoting the broader range of skills and dispositions, including the important social, emotional skills. What's really interesting to see some of the models internationally, globally, that have been doing this work for 15 or 20 years, their schedules look completely different. That is one of the last things that changes in the United States with the innovative models, especially in high school. I was just in Westminster, Colorado, and their schedules look very, very different. They've got big blocks of time, almost every day, every week, and they're called WIN, W-I-N, win time. It's for what I need. So that students can go deeper on what they need, they can get support and help if they're ahead in one subject and behind in the other. They've been doing competency-based education since 2008, 2009. Just like Lindsay, California. So you start to see the structures and the schedules change. That's when you know you're really getting advanced in organizing time and resources around kids and what they need. And last, there is a lot of energy right now around modernizing professional learning, and this is great. You just saw a grant from the US Department of Education on rethinking colleges of education awarded across the country. At the symposium, we got so many proposals on innovative models in districts partnering with local colleges of education, intermediaries, 2Rev, Southern New Hampshire, others that are really rethinking how we support educators, do preparation, and support them over a lifetime of professional learning that's competency-based and personalized. And there's a lot of work happening in micro-credentials and badging around this. It's still early, but there is so much energy in the field. And so we've released over 100 publications researching emerging practices in the field. But please let us know what issues that you're working on and where we might help. These are all openly available, and we want to respond and help build the field, shining a light on the future. I will close with a quote. This is from Victor Garcia Hoz. This is from 1970. Hoz wrote more than 50 books on personalized learning from the 1970s to the 1990s. The learner's journey to developing their freedom of choice. That's how he defines personalization. The learner's journey to developing their freedom of choice. Hoz also felt the learning environment should be cognizant of the learner's cognitive, affective, and social emotional development. We are all on a journey. This work is complex, and it matters for our youth, for their futures, for our society. We are all on a path and a journey ahead. There's no one way to get there. And when I look outside here in Palm Springs, these beautiful mountains remind us to climb it, it's one step at a time. It's one step at a time. Celebrate how much you've accomplished in the past year, in the past years, and give yourself some room to open up to new ideas and visions for the future. Open yourselves up for sharing. Fundamentally, this is not about tweaking the existing system. We are fundamentally examining the culture, the structures, and the policies, building a bridge, shining a light on the future of learning. Thank you for allowing me to set the stage today. Now, we are thrilled that Dr. Brooke Stafford-Brizard will be our opening keynote, focusing on designing for the whole child. At the close of her keynote, she will be joined by Dr. Cantor in a question and answer session. And please, I would like to let everyone know, at the close of the panel at 5 p.m. today, we have a very special announcement, and I will ask everyone to join us and stay. Well, Dr. Brooke Stafford-Brizard is the Director of Whole Child Development at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, where she leads work to support a comprehensive whole child approach to learning and development. Before CZI, Dr. Stafford-Brizard worked as an independent consultant supporting the integration of cognitive and social-emotional development into school districts and charter management organizations through a connection between research, policy, and practice. As a senior advisor with Turnaround for Children, Dr. Stafford-Brizard authored The Building Blocks for Learning, a nationally recognized developmental framework supporting comprehensive student development. She began her career as a teacher with Teach for America at an intermediate school in the Bronx, and later co-founded the Young Women's Prep Charter School in Rochester, New York. Stafford-Brizard is a Pahara Aspen Education Fellow and a member of the Aspen Institute's Global Leadership Network. Please welcome Dr. Brooke Stafford-Brizard.
Thank you, Susan. And I want to thank the entire iNICL team for having me here tonight to kick off the coming days of conversation focused on the future of learning, because that is core to the vision we have at the Chan Zuckerberg Education Initiative. Our vision is grounded in that broader definition of success. We focus on that because we know from research and from the wisdom and experience of practice that far more than the academic competencies in the high school diploma are necessary for success in young adulthood. But if we only focus on those competencies, that is where our resources will go, and that is where our energies will go. And so we have to change that North Star to really reflect what we want for our kids to be successful in young adulthood. We're committed to leveraging personalization in this effort, and our definition is very similar to what Susan shared. We believe that personalization is about deeply understanding the unique passions, strengths, needs, and context of every learner, and tailoring the learning environment to meet those needs. As we think about the whole child approach that requires, I want to ask you a few questions. What comes to mind if you could picture a student who is thriving academically? Something like this? What about a student who's thriving physically? Something like this? And now if I ask you to picture a student who's thriving in their mental health, what does that look like? Was that a little bit harder? Did you start to think about maybe what they weren't? Weren't stressed, weren't anxious, weren't disconnected? We have a really hard time kind of bringing a picture of mental health as something that's asset-based and drawing from key strengths. And without that picture, it's really hard to then move to the skills and conditions that support that development. When we think about the whole child, we think about 6 key domains of development, and mental health is one of them. And across all of these domains, we anchor in that asset, strengths-based approach. So we define whole child to be inclusive of academic development, which is an important point in its own right, that whole child isn't everything but academic. We also name cognitive development, identity development, social emotional development, and physical and mental health. And because you cannot tease these apart in the human being, whether it's a child, an adolescent, or an adult, we work very hard to think about how we support integration in practice, because that's how we believe schools should look. Now, before I move into what the shift toward a whole child approach might look like, I want to ground us in a few more points of this framework. Let me go back. One is the deep connection to these skills in the context that our students are in. We do not want this to be an individualistic framework, because we know from the science that development of all of these areas is deeply grounded in the way that students are engaging with their community, with their relationships, and with their environment. And we're also deeply focused on equity when it comes to this framework. And that means focusing on the assets that students bring from their backgrounds, their cultures, and their experiences, and ensuring that our learning environments reflect those assets. And if we see gaps in performance that are correlating to race or income, we are deeply focused on the skills that we need to develop in those students, but we're just as focused on the environment that they're within. So fantastic if we can identify practice that supports a student's sense of belonging. Unacceptable to send that student back into an environment that might be emotionally unsafe or full of bias. And so all of our investments and our focus hold the individual and context hand in hand. So, with this approach in mind, I want to focus tonight on one component of this framework and do a deeper dive into mental health. I want to demonstrate the demand that we see for mental health in the field and the huge need for the focus on this. And then I want to focus on 2 goals. One is clarity on what we mean by that. As Susan pointed out, definitions matter. And then I want to get clearer on what it actually looks like to bring this into practice, so we can move from that why to the how, and really understand some of the shifts that we need to make in our schools. So, before we make that shift, I want to tell a couple of stories, so we can really understand what a typical student and a teacher might be experiencing in today's schools. So this is Christopher. He's 14, 9th grade, in a typical high school in a mid-sized city. And by the time he's on the bus in the morning, his head is swimming with thoughts and emotions, and only some of those are connected to his upcoming school day. On the family side, his father is struggling with a very serious illness, and Christopher has unresolved questions and frustrations and fear about that. And he's also navigating the increasing complexity of adolescent relationships, further complicated by the fact that he is in a new space of a high school environment. And yes, he's thinking about his upcoming day and the growing deadlines and responsibilities associated with his schoolwork. But because he sees that upcoming day as his job, to kind of enter that school as a student, he does his best to kind of compartmentalize and suppress the other emotions that he's feeling. And he walks into that first period math class trying to do that without talking to one adult or one peer. Throughout his day, he tries to stay under the radar, answering a few questions so he doesn't send off any alarms for teachers, which he's done for one teacher that he's fairly close with, but they have not been able to find that time to connect in the busy day. So he's back on the bus at the end of the school day, and he has all of these unresolved emotions, and he's exhausted from trying to suppress them and keep them from distracting him. And he's trying to do it again so he can get to work on his homework. Let's focus on one of Christopher's teachers. Before Kevin Hillman's feet touch the ground in the morning, he feels behind. He and his wife race to get themselves and their 2 kids out of the house. His mind is shifting between his family, his many students, a certain number of which he's very concerned about and constantly come to mind, and the lessons he'll teach as a science teacher that day. Those lessons are underway before he knows it, and his day is kind of a toggle between the joy and engagement he feels when he's immersed in those lessons, in the lab work with his students, and then class by class, he also feels a growing sense of stress and frustration with the students he can't reach. Whether they're actively acting out or just disconnected, he knows that there are serious issues driving that, and he wants to better connect with those students, but again, doesn't have the time. Christopher is one of them. And so when he ends his day, it's a combination of gratitude for his family and his relationships, frustration that he hasn't reached those kids, stress, because the stress that they're feeling becomes his stress, and a sense of inadequacy that he can't reach all kids. What would it look like if Christopher and Mr. Hillman had that space to process those emotions so they could feel more present, to make those connections and build those relationships that are so important to them? What would it look like to allow them to tap into the purpose and passions that drive why they're where they are? We know part of it looks like them both nailing, like the arm cross. So I want to paint the picture of what that can look like. One of our partner schools is Valor Collegiate. This is a charter school in Nashville, Tennessee, and it has a really unique founding story. Todd Dixon was a traditional educator and school leader, and his identical twin brother, Darren, had expertise and background in the clinical space and social work. And together, they co-founded a school that held academic rigor and development right next to social, emotional, and mental well-being of their students, with a vision that that would actually drive academic rigor and development. And it has. Valor has performed in the top 4% of state performance for the past several years. One of the practices that they have is a circle. And this is where students and teachers come to reflect on their personal growth, to build as a community, and also to restore. And so the clip I'm going to show you is a student who's come to engage in that restoration and take ownership of a disruption in class. What I really want you to focus on, though, is the reaction of the teacher and the fact that they had the space to do this.
Yeah, go ahead and stand up, buddy.
Dear Mr. Nelson, I am sorry for being funny in class. Please forgive me. I did not mean to make you mad. I will not do this again.
At Valor, we believe it's important not to leave any community member behind. In Circle, we discover when someone is going through a rough time, and it gives us an opportunity to offer that person support. Sadiq, I wasn't mad the other day when we had the disruptions in class. but I do accept your apology for calling out and for disrupting class. Please know that I really value our friendship, and I don't want you to ever feel worried. I think you're an amazing young man. I'm really lucky to be your teacher.
So I've seen again and again the impact that that practice has on students' personal growth, on the growth of Valor as a learning community, grounded in connection, trust, and vulnerability. And one of the reasons it's so impactful is because the Valor team believes if they're going to ask this of students, then they have to ask it and support their adults in the same practice. And so I also want to share a clip of what that looks like in the adult community at Valor.
I think some of you know, or I've shared just because of recent absences for being ill, that I do have lupus, which has just been terrifying. And I was told yesterday to ask for help here.
Circle allows individuals like myself, a Black, African-American man, to get to a point to where I don't have to live out a stereotype. I don't have to be cold and hard and callous. I just want to make a commitment to you that I'm here, and I just want to be present. And I don't even know what that looks like, but I appreciate you so much. And you're a model of what not only Circle, but what teaching looks like.
Appreciate you.
When we're most vulnerable is when learning takes place. And sometimes in our vulnerability, there is sometimes a pressure applied. And it's through that pressure that we gain the momentum and we gain the muscle that we need to power through.
So the principles and the vision that undergird what you see in that circle permeate that community. And it impacts the way that they staff, the way that they schedule, and the way that they're bringing their instructional leadership to the classrooms. So I see Todd bring that level of coaching and mentoring and supports through the academic lens. And Darren is doing the exact same thing when he's thinking about social, emotional, and mental well-being. So there is incredible demand in the field for this. But I don't really have to convince you of that because we've heard it directly from parents and educators like you. So when we asked parents and teachers the most important skill set that their students need in life, parents named mental health as the most important, followed by reading. And mental health was in teachers' top 5. And the majority of both parents and teachers feel that teachers should and can focus on this broader definition of success in the classroom. We're also hearing this directly from students. The Pew Research Center did a survey and found that 96% of adolescents, almost all of them, named depression and anxiety as a problem amongst their peers. And 70% of them named it as a major problem. And we know these emotions are at play in our schools. Mark Brackett and the team at the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale interviewed thousands of high school students. And these were the main emotions that they expressed feeling. We do see happy there, but we also see stressed, bored, tired, anxious, as prevailing emotions that our students are feeling. And it's similar for our educators. They're feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, stressed, as some of those core emotions. And so we know the need is clear and the demand is clear. But we can't get to solutions without turning back to that asset-based lens and thinking about how do we actually address this. So I want to move into how we define mental health through that asset-based lens. And we anchor on a number of frameworks that drive the way that we partner and invest in the field. And the first is one from the team at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at the Center for Healthy Minds. They're led by Richie Davidson, who's a neuroscientist who studies well-being. And he's named these 4 key areas as critical to well-being in students and adults. So the first is awareness. How are we aware of ourselves and finding the ability to be present in the moment? Like you're doing right now. Distractions left and right, but you're focusing in on the signal up here in the talk that I'm giving. Connection. Those relationships with others driven by empathy, compassion, gratitude that are critical for our healthy development. Insight is that deep knowledge of ourselves, what makes us tick, what might trigger us. And in particular, it's really understanding that we're constantly evolving. And then purpose. Having that really intentional focus on how you can contribute to the world in a way that's meaningful to you and of consequence beyond you. So these are 4 very broad key areas of what it means to be healthy and grounded in well-being. But again, they're very broad, and we can't just snap our fingers and make this happen for our students. And so we ground in another framework, in addition with a number of our partners, called the Building Blocks for Learning. And this is a framework that I developed in partnership with the Turnaround for Children team. And we'll talk more about this with Pam in a bit. It's a developmental framework that draws from developmental psychology, cognitive neuroscience, social psychology, to present a developmental trajectory toward higher order, non-academic skills. It's grounded in that critical cornerstone of healthy adult attachment, and then suggests the skills that ladder up to higher order skills like resilience and self-direction. There are a lot of frameworks out there, and we're all anchoring on different definitions of whole child. But there's also a lot of commonality. We see the focus on what we typically define as social emotional skills here, those inter and intrapersonal skills that drive relationships and learning. We see the work of the scholars that focus on mindset, things like growth mindset, sense of belonging. And we also see some of the core constructs that are driven in a trauma-informed environment. Let's focus in on resilience really briefly, because I want to drive a key point home here. If we think about resilience as being a set of skills that help us to persevere through challenging times and actually protect us against some adversity, the skills under resilience in this framework are proven in the research to drive it. But it's not an individual skill set. Not only do we focus on these individual skills, but the context around us is critical for resilience as well. So community, relationships, and culture drive this skill, and frankly drive all of these skills. It's what we've learned from the multiple sciences of human development and learning connected to these constructs. In terms of those sciences, we could spend the rest of this time, and frankly the rest of this week, naming the evidence that shows that mental health and wellness, as we're defining it, is key to learning. We've partnered with multiple organizations to synthesize and codify this science. And it's helped us understand that it matters from birth to early adulthood. The knowledge that relationships and connection actually build our brain starting in infancy, to the fact that sense of purpose is a core driver of perseverance and completion of college. But mental health and well-being is absolutely critical for the engagement in learning, in the process of learning. Our evolutionary success as humans is due to our emotions and our ability to socially connect. Because of that, those functions are intertwined with the cognitive processes that drive learning. Attention, memory, decision-making, motivation. We cannot tease these things apart. And they matter not just in the moments of learning, but in the way that we apply those learnings in the world outside, which is a social structure, and emotions matter there. Before I move on to the why, from the why to the how, I want to share one study. Researchers put 4-year-olds on swings. And they swung some in sync, and they swung some of them out of sync. Then the students were brought back into the classroom to complete a task. The students who were swung in sync were better listeners with each other, they were better collaborators, and they were more effective at completing the task. Now, I'm not sharing this because I expect you to go back and swing all of your kids in sync on swing sets. The message is more about intentionality. We don't leave learning algebra or learning persuasive writing up to chance. We don't count on a poster or a morning meeting to deliver those skills. We design, we plan, we're intentional, and we ground that in learning science. And the skills that drive mental health and well-being are no different. That intentionality is absolutely critical. It's also absolutely critical when we think about equity. We're focused on this deeply. And it's not just that we have to understand that we see toxic stress or chronic stress impacting the learning centers of the brain that are responsible for attention and memory. How do we impact students' mental health in an inequitable learning environment? What are we doing to their insight and their awareness when we don't recognize their cultures and ensure that those cultures are represented in their school? How do we impact their belonging when we don't attend to implicit bias that exists in a lot of our schools? We need to invest in the science to learn more about answers to these questions, but we also have to ground a lot of our answers in the space of practice and getting from that why to the how. So I want to bring us there. I want to focus on 3 core pillars of design that are critical in learning environments: skill development, relationships, and environment. And we're going to go deeper in this coming week in all of these spaces. The Turnaround for Children team is going to be presenting a number of times. The DC Public Schools team is going to share their story about how they've leveraged brain science to focus on personalization. There will be sessions focused on some of these specific skills and mindsets that I've spoken about, like belonging. But I want to leave you with some images and some concrete examples of what it looks like to bring these design pillars to practice. And when it comes to skill development, I want to focus on a partner that we have in DC Public Schools, Van Ness Elementary. And Cynthia Robinson Rivers is a principal who has been dedicated to integrating the science of learning development into her school. And she's learned some really important lessons along the way. So one, when it comes to skill development for students, that has to be grounded in learning science. And so many of us have what we would call a peace corner or a safe space in our classrooms. But Cynthia found that just creating that resource and giving students the opportunity to go there, to re-engage, to de-escalate, or to become more present wasn't sufficient. Because it's a skill set that that student needs to learn, and often needs to learn through co-regulation and relationship. And so when Cynthia started to really focus on the principles of learning science, like the opportunity for practice, the opportunity for feedback, and the ongoing application based on that feedback, she saw a dramatic difference in the way students could access and use these spaces. Cynthia also focused deeply on personalization. So one of the strategies that we tend to use in schools to think about presence and de-escalation is mindfulness or meditation. And that works for some students, but not for all. Some students need a more active strategy, like tossing a ball, or music therapy and engaging in a drum circle. Closing their eyes and meditating or being mindful is not the right strategy for all students. And so she's been able to think about how to differentiate there. Cynthia and the Van Ness team have also thought deeply about how to use every minute of the school day. And so if they see students who need more help with their emotional well-being, they have adults who are dedicated to those students and are using the minutes of recess to engage with that student in any time that they can find to really focus on their well-being. And if they also see students who need that support across the adult community, they increase the number of what they call rituals for love and connection that that student gets. But it's not left to chance. It's intentional, and it's led by that team. Those connections are absolutely critical for students to make, and that's another area where we have to think about personalization. Because students connect to us in very different ways. We all have different attachment styles. And so one student might need to be brought close and feel that connection, but that might not be what another student needs. In fact, it might trigger them. They might need to feel that support through demonstration of their independence and knowing that you're there. And so even the way that we connect with students and form those attachments needs to be deeply mindful and understanding of what works for them and where they're coming from. The second pillar is relationships. And you saw me speak to this deeply in the work of Valor and how they built those relationships across that community. I also want to focus on another core partner that we have, the Summit Learning Program. So Summit and the team focus on providing supports to hundreds of schools to implement a model that focuses on project-based learning, self-directed learning time, and mentoring. And our technology team at CZI supports the implementation of a platform that allows for that to happen and reinforces. We can only continuously improve that work if we're listening to teachers. And in partnership with that team, we're hearing from them constantly. And one of the things we're hearing is how important mentoring is. And that dedicated time, that intentional space to build relationships with students is something that they knew would matter, but they also acknowledge that unless it's intentionally focused on, unless that time is carved out, it's not going to happen. Summit and the team also leverage technology, and that's a critical tool in this space. And we're mindful that this has to be done strategically. And in Summit's case, the platform that students can use, where they can track their progress and gain awareness about themselves, and where the mentors can gain that same access to the knowledge about the student, that drives their face-to-face time together. That's content and fuel that helps them better understand each other and how that mentor can support the student. The final area that I want to focus on is environments. The physical environment around students is a critical space for supporting their mental health and well-being. The Science and Math Institute is a partner school that we have in Tacoma, Washington. It's a district high school that is embedded in a zoo, an aquarium. And so those students are not just able to use that cultural institution as a classroom, but they're also acting as docents for that museum. That gives them a connection to their community and the purpose that they have as members of that community. Codman Academy is a charter school in Boston, and they have restructured their entire physical environment to focus on being trauma-informed. And so what you see here in this picture on the bottom left is kind of embedding elements of nature in the walls, and it's across all of their classrooms. But you also see trauma-informed colors. And so those cool colors of the blue and the green and the cream-colored walls have been proven to calm students versus colors like yellow and red and orange that escalate and don't have that calming effect. And so they're mindful about how they use color. You'll also see that they've gotten rid of institutional hallways. There are nooks and corners and crannies that make that space feel more like home. And Montessori for All is a school that has taken that sense of home to an entirely different level. Their classrooms are actually little houses. They have porches and gardens. And so students have that sense of safety, comfort, and belonging that you have in a home. I mentioned all of the learnings that we're developing in partnership with our grantees and other partners in the field, because we're leveraging those. We're leveraging the learnings from our partners who synthesized and codified the science. And we're also leveraging learnings from practitioners who've been innovating in schools and classrooms for years. And we're using those to drive our investments, to bring stronger applied practice grounded in the science of learning and development, and support the development of more holistic learning environments. We don't believe this is possible unless we rethink partnership. Our schools and our system was created long before the sciences of human development and learning emerged. But a lot of it hasn't changed. We haven't found ways to route those learnings into the structures and the system and the design of schools. What would that look like? We believe we can only get there when we think about partnership across this framework. And so our work is really grounded in the evolution of the research practice partnership. And that means when we think about researchers, we want educational researchers right there at the table. But we also think about important partnership with public health researchers, neuroscientists, social psychologists, and how they can connect with each other. And with practitioners, we're deeply focused on classroom teachers, school leaders, and district leaders as core partners in this work. But we also think of practitioners as clinicians, social workers, pediatricians, and community organizers. We want to break down those kind of siloed fields and think about how all of those things integrate in the child and the adolescent, and focus on how we can build innovation in response to those partnerships. We can't address huge issues like serious trauma in our schools without having clinical psychologists and social workers at the table, not just partnering, but designing with us. We can't address things like sense of belonging in our students of color if we're not partnering with experts in racial and ethnic identity. We believe those types of partnerships will drive the work of education, and we're committed to that. Now, some of you are well on your way in this journey, and some of you are just getting started. But I think one thing, and Susan noted this a number of times, is there's no one solution to this work. What we've learned from partners like Valor and Van Ness is that there are very different ways of going about this. Valor was founded with that skill set that was complementary in mind. A traditional school leader co-founding a school with a clinical expert. But I don't know of any other identical twins in the field who have perfect complementary skill sets to create a whole child environment, and so that's not the one solution. Cynthia took a very different approach at Van Ness. She immersed herself in the science. She built book studies and book groups to help build the capacity of her adults. She partnered with an organization called Transcend that translates the science into practice and supports them in that space. And she thought about how things like discipline and her policies and procedures, when it came to that, needed to be grounded in human development and brain science. And so she's created those partnerships to ensure that the way she disciplines her students doesn't contradict or impact their mental health and wellness. Regardless of the path that you're taking in this space, there are kind of three key messages I want to leave you with. One important component of doing this work is conviction. There isn't one partner that we have in the field who didn't start their work with their adults. And that means shifting mindsets and creating that sense of understanding across the adult community. This is critical and just as important and drives academic development. And that's from your classroom teacher up to your board member. And it's not just the mindset. It's ensuring that teachers have the capacity building that they need to learn skills that were not part of their education preparation programs. And that means bringing in experts, universities, nonprofits. But it also means relying on deep expertise that you have within your districts and your organizations. Special education teams, clinical teams, social workers, school nurses. They have skill sets that can build adult capacity that are not just important for a subset of students through an intervention lens, but could impact the design and success of entire schools. The second takeaway I want to drive home is collaboration. None of our partners were able to do this alone. They had to think about the expertise and skill sets that they could access outside of the traditional paradigm of education. And that doesn't mean having a consultant come in at the beginning and give some guidance and maybe periodically check in. It's authentically resetting the table of partnership to really reflect the holistic development of students with deep expertise that's part of those spaces. And the final note is creativity. None of this will be possible if we don't access and allocate resources. And we're very encouraged by funding that we're seeing at the federal grant program level and across states. There's significant resources that are being allocated toward mental health in schools. But there are also resources within your own district. A number of the schools that we partner with have been able to leverage those school psychologists, those social workers, to again impact the entire environment and not just work with subsets of students. And so getting creative about the resources that are within your district and your organization is just as critical. I've been in this work for over 20 years. And every day I'm very mindful of the massive amount of work that we need to do to reach all students. But I'm also incredibly optimistic, because the hunger that we're seeing from students, from families, from educators to focus on that more holistic approach to education is real, and it's reinforced by the science. And I really believe with those authentic, innovative partnerships that we can reimagine what school can look like for all of our students through a more holistic lens. I feel pretty strongly that the future of learning is actually grounded in why I came to this work and why many of us came to this work. It's to support the healthy, holistic development of our children. Thank you so much for listening. So now I have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Pamela Cantor up to the stage, who is a friend and a partner in this space. And we're going to continue the conversation for a few more minutes.
Great job. Hi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, there are some really extraordinary ideas that you presented, and a couple that I want you to expand upon. And the first is this idea that you have presented mental health and wellness as something far broader than many of us actually witness in schools. I mean, mental health is, there's a social worker, a guidance counselor, and a child receiving a service who may or may not want that service. Your frame is broad, and it sounds as if you're saying everybody has a role to play.
Yeah, I don't want to underestimate the importance of clinical partners and some of those targeted services, particularly with students who are experiencing a tremendous amount of trauma. Like, we know that those are absolutely important. You know, tier 3, I would call them tier 4, tier 5 services that our kids need. And we need to find solutions for those within schools and beyond. But if we define mental health through that asset-based lens, and if it's really grounded in helping students to understand who they are, how to process their emotions, how to connect with others, how to connect with their purpose, then that should permeate their 24-hour cycle. It shouldn't sit in the silo of a service that might happen periodically. And that's what we know from developmental science, that learning and development requires that level of consistency and reinforcement that all of our adults can provide for students. We're too stuck in the existing paradigm of a school in those 6 to 8 hours that our students are in schools, when our students live in this 24-hour cycle. And so part of the paradigm shift and part of that future of learning is really understanding how we can have insight into that 24-hour cycle and support students across those hours.
And it seems to me, even as a practical matter, that a school like Codman or like Van Ness, where the whole environment is calming, that you may have fewer students that actually declare the need for an individual service, or will have multiple people that they can go to.
Absolutely. I mean, there's research that we both anchor on in adverse childhood experiences that looks at the impact that abuse, neglect, and instability has on students' ability to engage in learning. But While we know that students who have 4 or more of those experiences of adversity are 32 times more likely to present with learning or behavior problems, it's present with, right? They don't have them.
Right.
And so the more we understand that the context around our students is what's impacting them and their ability to engage in a learning environment, the more we can reach more students.
One of the other things that I was really excited to see you talk about, you know, when Susan was speaking, she used the word complex, that this is complex work. But one of the things I saw you advocating for was this idea of moving away from this idea of a silver bullet and moving toward integration of practices, that it is possible to focus on relationships and skill building and content at the same time. So there's a kind of advocating for new design that I heard in what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think I can't drive home enough what we understand of the connection between emotions, social belonging, and our cognitive processes. And those processes like attention and memory and motivation, in the learning experience, those are precious and limited. And so leveraging things like emotions and social connection, that can accelerate that process. We're designed for it to accelerate the process, but it can also act as a significant barrier. And so I would actually advocate that we have no choice but to think about the integration of these things, because they are not teased apart from the human child.
And I'm a little bit of a ringer because I know you so well, but if you were thinking of order of operations, there is something that comes through in your talk that is right at the top, and everything sort of flows from that. And that's attachment, it's relationship. Say another few words about that. Why? Why relationships? Why attachment?
Learning is a social process. It is not something that we do in isolation. And because, like I said, you know, our evolutionary success was grounded in our social structure as humans. We've been designed to learn and develop through that structure. And so relationships aren't about, you know, you hear criticism like loving kids to death or coddling them. There's nothing coddling about the nature of valor, right? Like you can still hold kids accountable, you can hold adults accountable. There is a rigor to the relationships, but we know from developmental science that that is the absolute foundation. It's how our brains develop as we grow, in that social connection, and it's how we learn.
So you have many, many people here who are in different parts of their path, as you said. And the work is complex. But if you were to say, what would be the starter dough? If people in this audience want to walk out and use what you're talking about right away, what are the 1 or 2 things you would tell them as where to start?
I love the image of the starter dough. I wish I could bake bread because I would nail the metaphor, but I can't. So,
I've been working on that.
Adults. Start with your adults. I mean, you see the research that shows how adults are feeling in our classrooms and in our schools. And if we start by addressing their emotional needs, then a few things will happen. Like, one, you take care of a whole adult, they will take care of a whole child. That will permeate and it will flow. But the more adults can understand the impact of a focus on their social and emotional well-being, then the more buy-in and understanding they'll have for prioritizing that and reinforcing it in a school.
So I have another question for you. One of the things that is often, it's a question I get, which is, if you put relationships right at the forefront, and we have practitioners who are, by and large, still in fairly traditional environments, there is this idea of, how do I know my kids as individuals? How do I see them? How do I recognize them? I know that you're working a lot with practitioners, to crack the back of that? What are some of the things that you're hearing that really enable that kind of personalization to happen?
I think when school and district leadership carves that intentional space, like educators know how to connect with their students. Teachers know how to connect. But if that intentional space isn't created in a schedule, like I was very struck by Susan's comment that scheduling is one of those last things to actually shift. And that's what we hear from teachers. That when they leverage a program like Summit and there's finally that intentional space to provide mentoring to students and focus on relationships and guidance one-to-one, like they knew it mattered, but they also know that without that intentional space to do it, it won't happen because you have all these other competing priorities in this space. And so I really push it to the district and the school leaders to think about creating that space for their teachers.
So bringing up Summit for another moment, because it is a technology-based platform, but one that incorporates environment and relationship. What is the role that could serve the purpose you're talking about here that relates to technology? How should it be used?
I think technology is a tool that can help us better understand how to effectively and efficiently engage in those face-to-face moments in this space. So that's one way. That the more we can use a tool like that to better understand students' background, their experience, where they're progressing, where they're struggling, and where students can use that to self-reflect and understand their own path. Again, that is content to drive rigorous, meaningful conversations. You have something to start with. Technology is also proving to be a really powerful potential tool in the space of mental health for adolescents. We're learning from different partners in the field that oftentimes for adolescents, that space of anonymity to reach out and kind of cut out the middleman of another adult is really important. And so something like the crisis text line, which was established in 2013 as a platform for students to use texting to reach out for help and supports. Since 2013, they've engaged in over 100 million messages. And so that has proven to be a significant tool for adolescents to reach out and get certain supports.
Well, one of the things that impresses me so much of what you've done here is creating critical connections between things that often are experienced by practitioners as false choices.
Yeah.
So if I focus on wellness and mental health and the social and emotional dimensions of life, I'm soft on academics and rigor. And what I particularly loved about what you did is you didn't let that happen. You really enabled us to see that these are things that have to be woven together. And if we haven't done it yet, then that's what we have to do.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And we are, firmly committed and focused on continuing to support academic development as a core component of our schools, in addition to these other areas of whole child development that are critical and drive that academic development. And that space of rigor, everyone in this room understands how to design with rigor. We just tend to do it in the academic space. And so if we can bring that into the space of supporting social, emotional, mental well-being of our students and thinking about that integration, I think incredible things can happen for our kids.
Well, I know everybody here is very charged up by what you've said and very, very inspired by it. Thank you so much. I know what it took to put these ideas together. Thank you, Brooke.
Thanks, Pam.
Super.
Oh, do you want a picture real quick? We'll take a quick picture here. If people want to stand up and stretch for a second, please. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Stafford-Brizard. Thank you, Dr. Canner. We're profoundly thankful. Those of you, we've been sitting for a long time, and we know our mental health and well-being and our body needs some room. So please stand up and stretch. What you're doing is truly yeoman's work, and we want to thank you for raising our field to a higher notion of purpose. Let's just give Dr. Brizard and Dr. Canner a last round of applause. Thank you. We appreciate you. All right. So, we're getting ready for the big announcement. Raising this field has been a labor of love. It's been an honor, and it's been a moral responsibility collectively with all of us across the field. And for 15 years, we've come together as a community to tackle the toughest problems around innovating education. We're looking at righting the ship, steering a course towards the highest ideals of what is possible for the future. At iNACOL, we've attempted to be as transparent as possible in all of our work. You might remember 3 years ago in Orlando, we shared with you that given the changing nature of our work, we were finding our name, iNACOL, to be a persistent challenge, not just in pronunciation. Today, we're here to announce a solution. The founding of NACOL and later iNACOL was always about creating opportunities for students, expanding access, and ultimately achieving educational equity. An online learning organization, NACOL, the North American Council for Online Learning, became an umbrella for a vast collection of ideas and practices to shift the way we think about teaching and learning. The focus on the delivery method, online learning, because it contained a wealth of unparalleled and unprecedented opportunities to innovate learning environments and the way we think about teaching and learning. This focus was rooted in the fundamental belief that for our nation to succeed, every single learner in K-12 education needed access to high-quality teachers, that we needed to rally support at the local, state, and federal levels to create these changes.
If I were to rewind 10 years ago, we understood that technology was forever going to be a part of our paradigm. But we had, at that time, technology as essentially a driver of learning, versus now what we're doing is leveraging technology to create opportunities, to create access for all of our kids.
Our focus has grown to examine systems change and education innovation, facilitating the future of learning through personalized learning and student-centered approaches to next-generation learning. We're serving more as a thought leader and resource provider to the entire field of K-12 education to equip and inform practitioners and policymakers who are interested in education transformation.
You know, this organization is a trusted source of information and guidance for a lot of people. It was an early leader on an edge of educational change that now dominates the landscape.
Over the last 20 years, the organization has worked to develop a great level of trust, credibility, insight, thought leadership, and partnership with organizations and communities across the country and across the globe.
Education in this country needs to change and modernize like every other facet of our society. It has its roots in some old ideas about supporting a few people to be leaders to lead the rest of us forward. It's not a culling and sorting process anymore. It needs to be a thoughtful education process that really helps move people forward so they can help the rest of us have a prosperous future.
So the team here has really inspired a movement. It's a movement that's focused on equity and access, ensuring that all kids are able to receive that truly that American dream, where we as educators and as learning communities can finally deliver on the promise of ensuring that every kid is graduating with the unique skills, dispositions, and knowledge that'll prepare them for whatever aspirations they have post-graduation.
Learning doesn't stop at when the bell rings. We all know that. Many of the most important things any of us have learned have happened in school, maybe out of school. The direction that education is taking is about moving towards something that some people call student-centered learning. And that's the idea that you can learn anywhere, anytime.
we're able to create these really unique learning experiences that transcend our school walls, that allow kids to see the meaning and the application and the reason for their learning of these competencies and these masteries, but also they're able to see their place in their own community and how they can lead and excel and succeed in their community as well.
We really have to be concerned with being good at noticing, are young people learning what they need to learn? And when they're ready to move on, let's let them move on. It doesn't have to be June, it could be earlier, it could be later. So we need to think about pacing differently, without letting children with bigger challenges lag behind. And we need to push harder to change the structures, the policies, the practices, and most importantly, the mindsets of people.
We have to move from tweaking around the edges to examining the structures and root causes of inequities produced by our institutions, especially education. In late 2017, our board of directors helped formalize this shift by adopting a new mission, vision, and values for the organization. Our mission is to drive the transformation of education systems and accelerate the advancement of breakthrough policies and practices to ensure high-quality learning for all. We envision a world where all people are empowered to attain the knowledge, skills, and dispositions necessary to achieve success, contribute to their communities, and advance society. We are student-centered, equity-driven, and future-focused. In our work, we strive to be, and value above all, being credible, knowledge-driven, and collaborative. However, our name has been a barrier to doing our current high-level work in education transformation because it harkens back to a time and a focus that no longer fully represents all of who we are and all of what we do.
As we change direction and move forward with our mission, it just makes sense to move from what was a very strong, positive, and powerful past into a promising future.
iNACOL has outgrown its name. It was initially designed around a vision for technology integration. It is now focused on truly creating these learning opportunities and experiences that are meaningful for each child and for each community.
iNACOL is now the Aurora Institute. Aurora means dawn. We think it's a powerful metaphor about the potential and promise embedded in K-12 education. An aurora signals a fresh start, a new beginning, and hope for the future.
The Aurora Institute's about shining the light on new paths, new innovations, new opportunities to truly drive to greater levels of equity.
The organization you've been part of for the past 15 years is still here. We will continue to conduct research, issue publications, host webinars, visit schools, analyze and develop policy, track legislation, and offer technical assistance. We'll continue to facilitate networking and learning communities and advocate for personalized and competency-based education and continue to host the annual Symposium.
I hope you are as excited as I am to think about the future possibilities that the Aurora Institute brings, not just to you and to I, but also to our learning communities across the country and across the globe.
An aurora is a light that illuminates the path forward, and that's what we do. Aurora, a new dawn for every learner. There it is! Oh, we can't be more excited. Thank you so much. This has been a long time coming, and we can't be more excited to share this good news with all of you. And we hope you see the new opportunities that this will open up to us, to all of us, now that wondering what our name stands for is off the table. All of the work and the legacy embedded in the iNACOL name that means so much to us will continue under the Aurora Institute. The change is not walking away from who we've been in the last 15 years. What this change does for all of us is widen our tent, open up the table, and allow more people to sit at the table, engage in our work, in the kind of work to help inform ideas and this vision of the future, to achieve our mission. We want to celebrate our new shared identity and shared future, And I'm inviting all of you to join us at the President's reception. Grab a drink and join us for a toast at the top of the hour at 6 p.m. And let me just conclude today's opening session by acknowledging thank you. Thank all of you. Thank you isn't enough for placing your trust in us for all of these years. We take it as a badge of honor to continue to host the symposium, to have the symposium enhanced with a mosaic of all of your work from year to year, and all of the work that we've done collectively across the field, helping to move us forward. Let's continue to grow together and do more and do better on behalf of our young people and our educators and our school leaders. Here's to a new beginning. Our choir will join us to sing us out of the reception, and you'll hear from our board president, Nick Donahue, at the top of the hour in the reception. Thank you, everyone.
Blue